Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another edition of the Benchwarmer Sports podcast. I'm Raffi, as always, joined by Davian. Davian, it has been a minute, as they say. How are you? I would say it's been a great day, but it's only just a good day because if it was a great day, the Yankees would be already out of the playoffs, which they are currently not. But they might go only up 2-1 now, so I guess things are kind of okay. But
Hey,
anyways,
look, game's not over. All right, it's 4-3 and the bottom of the eighth. So all I'm saying is my predictions are starting to come out to be right, Rafi. Right? Because I predicted Yankees and Mets both in the ALCS and the NLCS. Right? Did you predict that, Rafi?
yep, I did not
No,
know.
no, you did not predict that.
I'm a Yankees hater. We have already
Right,
discussed this.
right. So you put your hate over the Yankees so far and beyond your actual sports knowledge, it makes you look like a fool now. Just saying. Just wanted to point that out. The only reason why I'm, riding your ass about this right now is because the Patriots aren't doing that great. But it's okay.
Yeah,
Drake May look good.
for those who don't recall, Davey and I made a wager off to the side actually after the podcast of our NFL predictions where Davey and I agreed to a over under 5 wins for the Patriots. I said the Patriots would not get more than 5 wins. The Patriots proceed to win Week 1 versus the Bengals. And Davian, how many wins do they have since then?
Look, man, we play the Jaguars on Sunday in the UK. I think that's a winnable game. Then we play the Jets, and the Jets are like doo doo and stinky. And I think we can win that, even though we got crushed by them a few weeks ago. So honestly, man, I think your prediction is gonna be wrong. And that's all I'm gonna say. All right, it's never over until it's actually over. So
I
that's
will
all I'm
say
gonna
though,
comment on.
I as much as I clearly have ripped the Patriots, I will give my shout out and flowers to Drake May, who had a decent game last week in his debut. 250 yards, three passing touchdowns, two interceptions against a really tough team in the Texans. So you know what, I can be critical, and but I will also give my props when it's due. And you know what, Drake May, not off to a bad start. We'll see. Obviously, you'd love to see him take advantage of the Jacksonville Jaguars. Obviously, we saw
Yeah,
Caleb Williams the past 2 weeks really step up his game versus the Panthers and Jaguars. And personally, in my opinion, I get into this type of territory where I'm always like, okay, well, he's doing well against the Jaguars and Panthers. Like you did, like obviously he would have to be doing. He should be expected to play well against those two teams. But then again, I think the main thought process in my mind that's winning is if he was playing bad against the Panthers and Jaguars, then the world would be, or at least Chicago would be burning to the ground right now. So, I'll
yeah.
take Caleb Williams. You know what? He put on two good performances. Yes, they were two of the worst teams in the NFL, but I think most Bears fans would much rather see Caleb Williams show out over these two teams and dominate rather than see him just throw three picks in each game and just look
Yeah,
out of
I,
place
I'll,
as a
I'll
whole.
agree with
So
that.
maybe he'll build off this more. And also, Davian, too, the NFC North this year, the worst team is the Bears, and they're 4-2 right now. Although the Bears have had a pretty easy schedule.
Yeah, I'll agree with that. And talking about Bears fans, let's talk about former Bears QB, Justin Fields. The fact that the Steelers are considering benching him is insane to me. The guys brought this Steelers team to a 4-2, fairly solid offense, and all of a sudden, Mike Tomlin's like, oh well, we'll see who's gonna be starting next week. I'm sorry, there's no question who's starting next week. You trade Russell Wilson and you move on. You found your QB in Justin Fields. Why in the world would you bench Fields? It makes zero sense to me. This guy keeps getting screwed over team after team, and I really hope that he finds his home somewhere because this is absurd. The guy's balled out and he's not getting the respect that he deserves. And it's disgusting to me as an NFL fan to see that.
Honestly, I'm going to disagree with you a little bit. I don't think, like, obviously last week he played very well against the Raiders, but similar to Caleb Williams torching the Jaguars and Panthers, it's the Raiders. So I hope that Justin Fields will play pretty well. But he's lowered the amount of picks he normally throws. He has been fumbling the ball still, which is certainly an issue. But I think the Steelers, as they have been the past couple of years, are winning games largely in account to their defense being once again a top 5 unit, and once again TJ Watt being
Yes,
TJ
that's
Watt
true.
and doing TJ Watt things. So honestly, I think the Steelers go as far as TJ Watt takes them, and Steelers fans better pray that TJ Watt stays healthy. Otherwise, this season is going to go completely off the rails. And you know what? I get it. Russell Wilson, throw him out there, see what he's got. I don't think Justin Fields has done enough to cement himself as QB1, which is again, as you're saying, like ridiculous. He's 4-2 with the Steelers so far, but again, I don't think his quarterback play has done enough in my mind where I think it's completely out of the question. I think it's worth the Steelers throwing out Russell Wilson once he's healthy, seeing what he can provide, seeing what if he's still got it or if he's washed, and I think then you go from there and give Russell. So you give Russell Wilson a game or two. If he looks still completely like out of it, then I think it would be time for the Steelers to go back to Justin Fields.
Yeah, I mean, look, look, my thinking with just QBs in general is that a lot of them are very emotional. All right, that's just how it is. I mean, and I think just you kill Justin Fields' momentum by benching him, and you already have a system. Like, look, I'll take back what I just said. Yeah, he hasn't been like this Patrick Mahomes esque type player in the past few weeks. No, but he's been solid. And what I don't understand is why, if it's not broken, why change it, right? So like
Yeah, that's certainly fair.
that's what I don't understand from just a standpoint of on a coaching standpoint. Don't get me wrong, Russell Wilson is probably comparably a better QB than Justin Fields, and most likely deserves to start over Justin Fields. But I'm just taking the current. You're 6 weeks into the season, right? You're 4-2. You're doing well. Why try to force in Russell Wilson? I understand, him getting practice reps and whatnot, but this is more than that. This is Mike Tomlin saying, "Oh well, he might be starting." And for me, I just don't understand that. But who am I to judge? I'm a Patriots fan only.
This is true. Let's keep it in the AFC East. You just mentioned the Patriots. You're New England Patriots,
Yep.
so we'll move into the AFC East because following Monday night's absolute show from the Bills and the Jets, and by show I mean the show that was stolen by the referees, as there was I believe 22 accepted penalties in that entire game. The
Yeah,
ref
this is,
the
this
ref
is
ball
nuts.
was
These referees are
insane.
terrible
Greg
this year.
Zerline was hitting posts at an insane level. I think he hit the field goal post twice, missed 3 field goals or something like that. Tyler Bass missed a field goal too. It was a game for the ages. And following that game, both teams decide, you know what, we want to upgrade our receiving core. We'll start off first with a little more low key move, I guess, in comparison to the bigger one, which we'll get into shortly, because there's a big personnel change as well that I'd like to discuss. So starting off with the Bills, they acquired Amari Cooper, and in this trade, they traded a third-round pick and a seventh-round pick, got Amari Cooper and a sixth-round pick. I think we can all real quick laugh at the Cowboys. We'll do that a little later, laugh at the Cowboys more, but we can laugh at the Cowboys as they traded Amari Cooper to the Browns for a fifth. I think this worked out for the Browns pretty nicely in the fact that they were able to restructure his contract at the start of the year. He only has 1 year left, and his cap hit to the Bills is only $1 million, making it really tradable. And obviously, they found their fit with the Bills. And I like this deal. Josh Allen has been doing a pretty good job slinging it so far. He hasn't been as crazy as he has been in years past with the passing offense, but I think that's largely attributed to the Bills finally having a solid run game with James Cook, who's been really good this year, aside from being injured, of course, the past couple weeks. And I like this trade a lot for the Bills. I think you got a wide receiver one in Amari Cooper. I have Amari Cooper in fantasy, so hopefully Amari Cooper shows out. But this is a guy that I think is definitely a for sure wide receiver one for the Bills, and goes from getting Deshaun Watson throwing balls to him to now a much more accurate passer. And I think this is really going to open up the Bills' offense even more now.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think this is a steal of a trade. I think it puts the wide receiver market in such a weird position where there are these very good players, such as Amari Cooper, that are getting traded for like barely anything. And I feel like you've been seeing that like in the past few years. We'll
Yeah.
talk about the other trade that happened, later on. That was also in the AFC East. But sticking with Amari Cooper, he's been a very solid player, but he keeps getting traded for a very low price and definitely not like what he's worth. And I think his play on the Bills will show that he deserved way more. And what I mean by this, when I say like, oh, players aren't getting traded for a lot, I mean think back to the Jahan Dotson trade between the Eagles and the Commanders, where the Eagles traded him and got a third round pick, right? And the Eagles traded in exchange for a third round pick and two seventh round picks in 2025. They traded Dodson and a fifth rounder. It's kind of nuts, like the trade value, like that, like the trade value for Dotson is somehow more than it was for Amari Cooper. Just make that make sense, and you really can't. But I think this was a very, very smart move by the Bills. They needed a new wide receiver one, and they found it in the best and the cheapest way possible.
Yeah. And I think, as you just mentioned, with trade value just being really weird in the NFL, where you see hockey players all the time, you'll see a guy who normally you'd have slotted in your bottom pair at getting traded for a first round pick, and then you'd see other players of higher caliber, and you see NBA where it's just like, shut up and take my first round picks. Like, I'll give you five of them for this player, and it's like some role player who's coming off the bench. So it's kind of different. Definitely, it's definitely different in the NFL in the sense that, as you mentioned, a lot of these older players tend to get traded for late round picks, even though they're playing at pretty high level. And I think the way that I've been trying to think about it is expiring contracts is obviously going to lower a player's value. I also think
True.
age is a really large component of this as well. Thinking about the Christian McCaffrey trade, where he got traded not for a first round pick, but for a second, third, fourth, and some other value things. The Amari Cooper, the Khalil Mack trade, for example, when he was traded from the Raiders to the Bears, that was, I believe, two first round picks. So I think in that sense, and the way I've been thinking about it is, okay, first off, is this player young? If this player is young and is showing really good potential or is developing well, then teams will be willing to pay first, second round picks for that type of player. And the other thing too is, if the player is in their 30s or early 30s, one, is this player under contract for multiple years, and we'll get into this shortly. And secondly, is this player a top five player at the position? If he's that high caliber, I think teams would be more willing to part ways with a second round pick or first round pick versus other things. Because let's be honest here, Juju Smith Schuster, I believe, if I remember correctly, got traded from the Steelers to the Bears for pick 33 or pick 32. So wide receiver value and just value in general just varies. And I think the big components is there more years left on this contract? What's the age of the player? And what prestige are they? What's their ranking in the NFL? So that's kind of how I've been trying to map out trade value as a whole. But then Davante Adams gets traded for a third round pick with the possibility of going up to the second round pick. So we don't, like, who knows what's going on with trade value as a whole. Speaking of Davante Adams and mentioning that, Davante Adams now going to the New York Jets, joining everyone else. So you might as well just call the New York Jets the Green Bay Packers 2.0 at this point. And he was traded to the Jets. The Jets gave up a third round pick with the possibility of going up to a second round pick based on a variety of performance based conditions.
Yeah,
And
those
again, I think this is a great deal for the Jets, but I'll let you elaborate further.
Yeah, I mean, you just mentioned those benefits, like like how does it become a second round pick, and it's if Devontae Adams ends up as a first team or second team All Pro, or if he's on the active roster when they make it to the AFC Championship. I think the first one's more likely than the second one. I think it's very likely if Aaron Rodgers and Devontae Adams, regain the connection that they had. So I think at the end of the day, if this trade ends up being Devontae Adams for a second round pick, that's a very solid trade, and that's a going back to what I was saying about trade value, right? Davante Adams for a third round pick doesn't make much sense, but Davante Adams for a second round pick makes a lot more sense. And one thing I will mention about this trade, which is a caveat that a lot of people are noticing when they really are talking about trade value, is that the Jets picked up the entirety of Davante Adams' contract, which is
Right.
huge.
Contract is
And that was
massive.
a big thing with the Raiders. They didn't want to trade him if they had to continue, if they had to carry the load of his contract. And props to the Raiders GM. He took, he waited for a team to bite and needing for a wide receiver, and that's what that ended up being the New York Packers, calling in. And yeah, I mean, this this Jets team is really doesn't, we didn't talk about this because we weren't here last week, but the firing of Robert Saleh and then the promotion of Jeff Ulbrich to head coach doesn't make any sense to me because the Jets defense has been playing fairly well, right? And that was the whole thing about Robert Saleh, why they brought him in. He is a defensive minded coach, right? If there's anyone that should have been fired, it should be Nathaniel Hackett, right? The offensive coordinator. But it seemed like for some reason he's safe. And so when they fired Robert Saleh, they brought in Jeff Ulbrich, who's also a defensive minded coach because they just promoted the defensive coordinator to the head coach. So it doesn't really make sense to me about where the Jets are trying to take this, and it just shows how much of a dysfunctional franchise they are. And I think Bill Belichick really said it best when he commented on Monday Night Football that this team, this is insanity to me. And the fact that Woody Johnson, as an owner, is able to chime in like this and do something like this is stupid, and almost as stupid as Jerry Jones is handling the Cowboys. Which we could talk about the Cowboys for an entire hour because that team is terrible. I'm sorry, there's nothing looking good for them really. The offense cannot click. The defense is no longer as strong as it was. And Jerry Jones, spent all of free agency really not doing anything. And it kind of shows now how other teams are improving. Other teams are really moving pieces around to become a better team. And instead, the Cowboys really just sat on their asses and didn't do anything. But I'm sorry, going back to the Davante Adams trade. Rafi, what are your thoughts? Do you think that this makes the Jets a contender for the playoffs? Because don't forget that this AFC East is very, very weak, right? You have the Bills, who have been struggling. We clearly saw on Monday Night Football. The Jets, who are the Jets. The Patriots, who... I can't say anything about the Patriots. Patriots are also contenders. Trust. No. And then you have the Dolphins, who are the two less Dolphins. So, and they
Yeah,
haven't
the
been doing
offense has
well.
completely fallen off from since Tua's gotten injured. And obviously, the big thing is
Yeah,
just Tua being healthy to a point where he feels good and ready to play again. But yeah, once again, people with Devon Achane and then you have Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle. If you have any of those guys in fantasy, you are feeling the loss of Tua to a major, major level. And yeah, the
yeah,
AFC East doesn't look as competitive, at least as I initially had it, and that's again largely due to injuries and the Jets being the Jets. I had three teams in the playoffs, or at least all three teams at least 10-7, and now that prediction is looking a little shaky as a whole. But we'll move on. And speaking of the Cowboys, Davian, how panicked should Cowboys fans be right now over the Dallas
very.
Cowboys and are as a franchise? And you'd have to expect Mike McCarthy is coaching his final season as head coach of the Dallas Cowboys.
Look, this Cowboys team is just. I mean, I'm gonna look up their just like their scores and everything, but you only dropped 20 points on the Giants, which haven't been good. This team just doesn't look good, and they're currently sitting third in the NFC East at 3-3. The Eagles are clearly a better team. The Commanders are, we talk about that. We're talking about the panic index right now. Let's, if you want to talk about the excitement index, if I'm a Commanders fan, I'm over the moon with what I'm seeing right now. But I could tell I love this Commanders team, so I don't want to really start ranting about them too much. But this Cowboys team should be very panicked. I don't see anything good about them. They're 0-3 at home. They're getting outscored, outplayed. I don't see you fire Mike McCarthy, but that's just the beginning of solving everything that's going on. They're borderline at rebuild territory. That you paid Dak this contract, you pay, and there's so many other people who are going to be wanting massive contracts. They won't be able to support all of them. And this is if I'm the Cowboys fan, I'm getting very worried right now because this year was fairly a make or break it year for them, just given all of their contracts that they're going to be dealing with, and it seems like they're borderline crashing out. Now, look, I understand 3-3. They could always turn things around. We're only 6 weeks into the season, but I'd be worried. What do you think, Rafi? If you're a Cowboys fan, are you worried?
Absolutely, 100%. And going into this year, I already looked at the Cowboys in a similar fashion to the Packers a couple years ago and Aaron Rodgers last year, where it just was like it was the last dance kind of vibe, but it also was like your last dance was the year before. I just like I didn't feel good about it at all. It didn't give me good vibes, and the wheels fell off there. And the Cowboys clearly the wheels have fallen off as well in Dallas. I think the big thing too, Dexter Lawrence and Mike Parsons missing time has made matters even worse, as we saw this past Sunday with them allowing almost 50 points to the Detroit Lions. And as you mentioned, 0-3, they did this at home on top of it. And yeah, I'd be pretty panicked if I was a Cowboys fan. I think things have gone off the rails quickly. I think the only thing that's going to at least make this remotely okay is firing Mike McCarthy. This should have been done this past offseason. And the big thing, David, you mentioned $60 million to Dak Prescott. He has not looked great this year. And one would have to imagine maybe he's dealing with something, because other than that, I'm very surprised that he's been as bad as he's been this year. CeeDee Lamb has also been given a big contract, and although he's been solid, he hasn't been the wide receiver to the tier he's getting paid right now. He's not earning that the new contract he just got. And oh yeah, you still have Micah Parsons you have to pay. And if anything, Micah Parsons, when negotiating with Jerry Jones and the Cowboys, can easily just turn on the game versus the Saints and turn on the game versus the Lions and just say, pay me. And there's really nothing they can do at that point. Like, they have to
Nope.
pay him. Otherwise, you cannot risk him walking in free agency. So if I'm a Cowboys fan, I am 100% panicking right now. Moving on, Davian, how do you feel about the 49ers right now? Obviously, they've been ravaged by injuries, and Christian McCaffrey, we're still waiting on him. He might come back in a couple weeks, but I just get weird vibes from it, honestly. And it's because we all expected him to play week one, and then it was the Achilles thing, like, oh, like he might miss a little time or he might sit out 1 week. And then 1 week has turned into 6 weeks, 7 weeks. We still don't really know directly a true timeline. We keep getting told, okay, maybe like mid-November he'll come in. David, do you think Christian McCaffrey is even going to play this year? Or at the very least, do you think he's even going to play in the playoffs potentially? I just wonder if the Niners
Yeah.
just at this point say, you know what, sit out the entire regular season and we'll get you into the playoffs, or for whatever games he's back, they split it with Jordan Mason, who's been really well in the meantime for the 49ers. So they have Mason as the big running back getting all the touches, and then you let Christian McCaffrey kind of play around in the passing game more. So I just want to hear
Yeah.
your
I mean,
thoughts too about if the
yeah,
Niners
I
should be
think
panicked
Raffi,
and what your thoughts are on
yeah.
CMC.
No, I think you kind of answered the question, right? Like, oh, like Christian McCaffrey will make it to the playoffs. Like, we need you to play then. And I feel like that's kind of what I see. Like, I see this 49ers team, like, trotting into the playoffs, right? The injury bug is an injury bug, and that will always happen. So, and I feel like us as analysts, sports analysts, look at us, look at me calling us sports analysts. Um, I feel like us as fans, us as, lovers of the game, I don't want to predict injuries just because I feel like that's wrong. So, yeah, given the injury, bug that's been hitting the 49ers, I'd be kind of panicked based on that part. Who's next? I feel like that's that. If I'm a 49ers fan, I'm watching the games. I'm like, if I see a player go down, I'm immediately getting nervous. Now, in terms of what the team is built off right now, in terms of the injuries and who's coming back when and whatnot, I'm not panicked. I think they can make it to the playoffs. Yeah, they probably won't be number one in the NFC, but I think that's okay. And I feel like that's what people expected, especially with Christian McCaffrey's injury. In terms of if I'm worried about Christian McCaffrey's injury, I'd say yeah, I am. I mean, it's not even one leg; it's both of his legs that's the issue.
And
And
Davian, trust me,
when you're
not to cut
going
you
off to
off,
Europe, yeah. No,
but
go ahead.
I've
Go
been
ahead.
dealing with I've been dealing with Achilles issues for the past like couple years. It doesn't just go away magically. Like, you need to. It's a ton of stretching. I've finally been getting
Yeah,
into a good like routine of like just stretching them out and making sure they're looser. So this is maybe this treatment's obviously better for Christian McCaffrey, but just as someone who deals with this Achilles type of issues, it's not fun, and it's a
yeah,
pain in the butt to get rid of, and it drives me
yeah.
nuts too, because I haven't been able to run a mile in like a year or two without feeling extensive pain in my Achilles.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, like, I think like the only thing that I think Christian McCaffrey might have over you is that he's getting this like German voodoo treatment that all
Right.
of these athletes have been getting, and hopefully that helped him out. But beyond that, I mean, I don't know what to say. Um, it just sucks. I mean, the running back position is such a physically demanding position, that injuries like this will, they're just bound to happen at some point. Your body can only hold up so many hits, so many movements, and whatnot. So, yeah, that's what I'll say on the 49ers. I'm not too worried.
All right, last team that we'll talk about, the Cincinnati Bengals, 2-4. They had a great chance to
Oh.
get even up if it wasn't for some bungling of sorts against the Ravens a couple weeks ago. Their offense was terrible against the Giants this past week on Sunday Night Football. I unfortunately was one of those people who decided to watch that game, and yeah, this team, they've shown some flashes. They played pretty competitively with some of the top teams. All their losses for the most part have been, yeah, actually all their losses have been by one score. They lost to the Patriots, which, sorry Davian, but it's the Patriots. They shouldn't, there's no reason they should have lost that game. I know you're shocked. I know it's crazy, hot take. The Chiefs, we saw the refereeing, but again, you got to overcome that. They lose by 1 point to the Chiefs. Commanders, they lose by a touchdown. Commanders were finally getting some, like, okay, like there's some buzz around the Commanders. And then they obviously lose to the Ravens by 3 2 weeks ago. And again, a collapse for the ages by the Bengals. Some very poor coaching decisions led to a loss. Davian, how do you feel about the Bengals right now? They're 2-4. They still have a pretty favorable schedule down the stretch. I think if I'm looking at this just at the top, I think they're only playing like three teams that made the playoffs last year over the course of the rest of the year. So, do you think the Bengals can finally put together, or are you counting out the Bengals this year?
I don't know. I feel like week by week, I don't know what to say. I mean, I feel like there's some weeks they do really, they do fairly well, and there's other weeks I feel like they collapse. And I feel like this week is going to be like a big judgment week. How well do you perform against like a very poor Browns team? Do you kind of somewhat dominate the same way you did against the Giants, or are you going to kind of flounder? I just need to see more consistency from them. So, although I'm not going to count them out for the year, I would be fairly worried. I mean, yes, the end of their season is a bit, more friendly, I guess, in the sense that, you play the Cowboys, Titans, Browns, Broncos. Um, Crazy I'm mentioning the Cowboys as like a team that could be easily beat, but I mean, that's how it is. But beyond that, I mean, you still need to play the Ravens again. You still need to play the Steelers again. You need to play the Chargers team. You need, like, they have to play the Steelers twice still. I'm just saying, like, in terms of like winning the division, it's very hard. Like, this division has become way more competitive than it was, and I feel like you can't count out the Steelers anymore. Yeah, the Browns are out of it, but I'm worried if I'm a Bengals fan. I'm not counting them out, but I am worried.
Yeah, I would agree with that assessment. As I mentioned previously, I think their schedule is good for the most part down the stretch and does some favors for them. But once again, they cannot. They've had some performances similar. Like, I think that with the Bengals, okay, the good thing is the Bengals have what I think is a pretty nice schedule the rest of the season. The problem is, again, from the Patriots game and from the Giants game, it seems like they're playing down to competition. And it seems like they're overlooking these teams, which is, or sorry, underlooking, I believe is the proper terminology. Anyways, they think they go to play the Giants and Patriots and go, oh, okay, like this should be a win. Okay, we don't need to try too hard. And then they lose or they wind up like, oh, shoot, we're in a tight game where we're only up by a field goal versus the Giants. And then they're like, okay, like we need to like put some stuff together and try to win this game. So if I'm a Bengals fan, I certainly feel a little better with the fact that they played close in a lot of the games versus the top teams that they've been playing against, who are all top teams in the NFL this year. But again, some of that panic has to be settling in too, where it's like we haven't looked good versus any of these bad teams that we should be beating by 2, 3, 4 scores. So I think it kind of goes back and forth. It's kind of like a swinging pendulum in a sense of how I feel Bengals fans are trying to think about how panicked they should be or how they should be feeling about the rest of the year.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the coffin right there. Um, and we'll see what happens with that. But you know what I know? All I know is that the Patriots are going to turn things around, and that's what I'm hopeful for. That's my excitement factor.
Absolutely.
And
They will
all I
win.
know is that the
They will for
Yankees are
sure win
tied
two
with the
games.
Guardians at the bottom of the ninth right now. But I am hopeful. I am hopeful that the Yankees pull through. Yeah, that's all I'm gonna say.
Absolutely.
Yes.
100%. Could not close the show out any better. But that'll do it for this edition of the Benchwarmer Sports podcast. We hope you enjoyed. And we'll see what happens. Let us know in the comments who should be panicked, who should not be panicking, who's feeling pretty good right now. Let us know in the comments below. Be sure to hit that like button, subscribe to our channel, follow us on TikTok, Benchwarmer_sports for more sports content. For Davian, I'm Raffi. We hope you enjoyed this edition, and we'll talk to you again soon. See ya.
Peace.